Dr. Craig, there's a great group on Facebook called the Christian Apologetics Alliance. And some really good people in it. Tim McGrew and Paul Copan, and a lot of great people take part in this. It's one of the things that really redeems Facebook to me. There's real fellowship there. There's prayer. There's discussion of the arguments. And I actually thought we would take a little side trip, and I posted on this particular site, what are some questions that you would like for Dr. Craig to address in one of our podcasts? And boom, we got a lot of questions.
Good.
And so I thought we would just kind of go through some of these and let you give us some brief answers on some of these questions. So many of these people interact with your work, and so some of these are actually questions that are based on some of the work that you've been doing lately and so on. And by the way, Reasonable Faith has a Facebook site as well. And the Facebook page, you can go and give us a like there and see what's going on. First question, Jeremy says, oh, this is a great idea. Okay, Tim Davis says, I want to hear what Dr. Craig thinks are the most formidable challengers to the faith. What philosophers you think are that you call scary smart sometimes, he says.
Right, that is the description I use for Graham Oppy,
Yes.
who is an Australian philosopher at Monash University. He is, I think, the most formidable atheist philosopher writing today. And so if you want to really be challenged philosophically, I'd say look at Oppy's work. The other person that I would name would be the late J. Howard Sobel, who was at the University of Toronto, a Canadian philosopher. Again, a sort of classical philosopher, so broadly read, so knowledgeable in all the areas of philosophy, and a real gentleman too. When I met him, he was always congenial and good to talk with. So he's written a massive book called The Logic of Theism, which is an enormous tome, and I think is one that repays study. So those would be the two that I would name as being the most significant challengers philosophically.
Okay. Daniel asks, I'd like to know if Dr. Craig views scholastic realism as a form of conceptualism and why he finds nominalism more plausible than scholastic realism.
This is really a
Explain those
difficult
terms.
question to answer because it's not at all clear what scholastic realism is with regard to so-called abstract objects like properties and propositions and numbers and so forth. The medieval scholastic Christian theologians took their cue from Aristotle, but there seems to be disagreement among neo-Aristotelian philosophers as exactly what constitutes an Aristotelian view of things. On an Aristotelian view, properties that are not exemplified by something do not exist. There are no properties, for example, of being a unicorn, because there isn't anything to exemplify that. Properties are supposed to exist immanently in the things themselves. But the difficulty is understanding what that means. Usually, this is metaphorical language. To say that the property exists immanently in the thing is to say that the thing exemplifies that property. But then the property is an abstract object, which stands in this odd and undefined primitive relation of exemplification to the thing. Or you could think of the property as an aspect of the thing which is isolated by the mental act of abstraction. For example, I could think about the color of your shirt and I would abstract everything else away from the shirt. Its style, its material, its size, and finally I would have nothing left but the color, and that abstraction could be thought of as the universal or the property that exists in the shirt. But in that case, it's hard to see how this is really an existing thing, this property. It seems to be merely an abstraction formed by the mind. And maybe in that sense, he's thinking that these are merely conceptual realities. Or some Aristotelian philosophers that I've read seem to think of the properties as being actual physical things, concrete things. So they would say that these universals or properties are concrete constituents of things. But in that case, it's really hard to understand, Kevin, how they could be multiply exemplified by different things. How could different things share the same color if the color is a concrete object that exists in one of those things? The whole point of saying these are universals is to say that a universal, unlike a concrete object, can exist in multiple places at once. So if you think of them as concrete universals, it's really hard to understand how they could be multiply instantiated or exemplified. And then again, when you read these medieval theologians, someone like Augustine will say that the Platonic forms or ideas are not really abstract objects, they're thoughts in the mind of God. Now, if you take that seriously, that would make them concrete things. They would be not abstract Platonic objects, they would be mental events in the mind of God. They would be thoughts that God has of various sorts, and thoughts are concrete, not abstract. So is that what you believe? The difficulty there is that when you get somebody like Aquinas, he denies that there really is a plurality of thoughts in the mind of God. He says we represent God's knowledge to ourselves as a multiplicity of thoughts or ideas, but in God's own mind, insofar as God is in himself, there isn't a plurality of divine ideas. God is simple and therefore just grasps all truth in a sort of undivided intuition. Well, now, to me, what that sounds like is anti-realism. That's saying that these ideas or propositions and possible worlds and things like that don't really exist at all. They're just ways in which we represent what God knows to ourselves, but in fact, they're just useful fictions. So it's just really, really difficult to understand what so-called the scholastic view is of these objects, because it seems to be so differently interpreted by folks.
What is the terminology for useful fictions? What does that view call? If these are just useful fictions?
That's broadly speaking would be an anti-realism. There just aren't any such objects. But within anti-realism, there are various types of anti-realism. For example, fictionalism might say that these are useful fictions, and that all of these statements referring to these sorts of things are really untrue or really false. On the other hand, a pretense theoretical approach to such objects would regard them as make-believe. You pretend or you imagine that there are such things, and that isn't incompatible with saying that statements referring to such things are true, even though they don't actually connect with real objects in the world. So 2 + 2 = 4 can be true, even though there really isn't any such object as 2 + 2 and 4, much less that these are the same object. It would be a matter of making believe that there are such objects, and then once you do that, you can enunciate certain truths about them. Or another anti-realism would be figuralism, that might refer to these sorts of things as useful fictions, because figuralism would say these are metaphorical. These are existential metaphors when we refer to these sorts of things, but they shouldn't be taken literally. So there's a wide range of these anti-realist views, and as I say, on some interpretations, this scholastic realism really looks like anti-realism, since it denies that there actually are a plurality of divine ideas.
You're going to have an exchange with Peter Van Inwagen soon. Are y'all going to talk about some of these issues?
Yes, because the third person in this dialogue is J.T. Bridges at Southern Evangelical Seminary. Let me say that again. Yes, because the third person involved in this dialogue is J.T. Bridges at Southern Evangelical Seminary, who is a Thomist, and so will be defending some version of this scholastic realism. I take heart in the fact that Van Inwagen, in interacting with this tradition, says he doesn't understand it either.
See,
he says, I don't understand what it means to say that these things exist in the concrete objects.
Two-part question from Glenn Richmond. He says, of those whom Dr. Craig has not debated, who are three he would most like to debate? And secondly, what would be the topic of his next debate?
Well, this may come as something of a surprise, but there isn't really anybody that I'm eager to debate. I'm not out there looking for opponents to debate. I do it when it comes my way and I feel like it's a worthwhile thing to participate in, but I'm not eager to take on any particular person.
It's not like you need a platform or anything. It's not like you have to have this platform. You already have it, and so when it presents itself, then you can consider it.
Yes, that's right. But I'm not hankering to debate people or planning such events. So there isn't really anybody that I'm champing at the bit to have a debate with.
You don't have a hankering for it. You've been living in Atlanta for a while. I'm going to say that. What about the topic of your next debate, he asks?
Yes, the next debate that I have will be in October. It will be in Germany with a German philosopher named Ansgar Beckermann. And Beckermann is very conversant with Anglo-American philosophy of religion. In his little book on philosophy of religion, he interacts with the work of Alvin Plantinga and Richard Swinburne and even me. So he knows the English literature as well as the German literature. And I think this will be a formidable challenge, especially since the debate will be in German. The topic of the debate is Existiert Gott? Does God exist? And in order to facilitate this debate, we're actually exchanging our speeches in advance so that the entire debate will be scripted, and we will then simply get up and read our respective speeches. But this should be a good debate because that means that each speech will be written only after weeks of reflection and thought on what the opponent has just said. It's not going to be off the cuff or extemporaneous. So it should be a very substantive and reflective debate, I think.
Chad asks that we do a podcast on the UK actor Stephen Fry and his comments, which are sweeping the internet. He says, and the answer to that is yes, we will. We'll do a podcast and consider that and take a look. Any thoughts on the growing movement in support of Dr. Craig's beard resurrection?
I do not understand this, frankly. The fact is that if I were to grow my beard back in, it would come in gray or white, and I would look even older than I look now, and I just have no desire to look like an old man in a white beard going around. So, and I don't want to dye it, you know, I don't want to color it. So, I'm not going to do this.
Well, I think they're just kind of ribbing you a little bit because this started a whole chain of talk on the resurrection of the beard and the ontology of the beard.
Yeah,
and,
to be young again, Kevin, it would be great.
I tell you. There is the problem of the beard. When is it stubble and when is it beard? at what point does the small group become a pile? You know,
vagueness.
So, there we go. This is a question about counterfactuals. Zachary says, I'm curious about the most plausible ontology for counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, and if a creature has to have actual existence?
As an anti-realist about abstract objects, I don't think that there are any counterfactuals of creaturely freedom in terms of propositions. I think there are sentences that are counterfactuals of creaturely freedom. You can utter or write down such counterfactual sentences, and I think they have truth values, but I don't think there are any propositions, and I don't think we need them in order to have a correspondence view of truth. So in terms of ontology, I just don't think there are these sorts of abstract objects. And similarly, the persons who are referred to in these counterfactuals don't exist until God creates them. When God, explanatorily prior to his creation of the world, is contemplating all of the various possible worlds that he might actualize and all of the possible individuals he might create and put in various circumstances, there just are no such people or circumstances or possible worlds at that point. That nothing but God exists at that point. But he just knows that if he were to create such and such a person in such and such circumstances, then that person would do such and such a thing. He would then exist, and if he were to exist and be in those circumstances, this is what he would do. But in that explanatorily prior moment, there isn't anything other than God. There's just God alone with his thoughts.
It's difficult to use in that state of affairs words like contemplate, God contemplating. If I contemplated something, it takes 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, I see. Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
But God's, you can call it a logical contemplation, perhaps, but it's instantaneous. It's not linear like we think.
Right. It's not as though this is something that takes time to do. God's omniscience alone precludes that, because he already knows the conclusions of any arguments leading to those conclusions. So he doesn't think discursively.
Yeah, it's almost difficult to escape the language sometimes. We're limited by the language sometimes.
Sure.
It's like we have to use words like that, even though we might mean them in a different sense.
Yeah.
Prior, not chronologically prior, but logically prior to, and so on. So that's an area of to get a handle on. Yeah, similar here. I'm curious why Dr. Craig isn't an idealist.
Well, I guess because I take seriously the creation story, that God has made a material world and that everything is not just ideas in God's mind. So I think you'd have to have some pretty strong arguments for idealism to say that there are no material objects, that everything is simply in the mind of God.
This next question is from Kurt. I was wondering if Dr. Craig would address a question I had about the relationship between apologetics and the Holy Spirit. I know that he has said that apologetics isn't necessary to have justified belief because he affirms a Reformed epistemology view wherein the Holy Spirit's witness in a person's life is sufficient. My question is this: is apologetics, broadly speaking, not necessary but sufficient for justified beliefs in the truth of Christianity? That is, couldn't someone base their faith upon the truth of the arguments? This seems different than the debate of what is necessary for justified belief. And I don't want to discredit the testimony of people like C.S. Lewis who became Christians because of the arguments.
Yeah. Did Lewis become a Christian simply because of the arguments, or was the Holy Spirit at work in his life, convicting and drawing him to God? I doubt that Lewis would say, after he was converted, that he came to Christ without the work of the Holy Spirit on his heart. But in any case, I do think the arguments are sufficient to warrant Christian belief. And in my work, I have defended various arguments for the existence of God and then for the historicity of God's self-revelation in Jesus of Nazareth by raising him from the dead. And I think that gives warrant for believing in what Lewis called mere Christianity. So, yes, I do think that the arguments and evidence are sufficient to ground faith rationally for the person who is fully informed about them.
Paul Copan asked a question here. He says, I've gotten questions recently concerning the Big Bang, the wave, or wrinkle in the universe's early expansion and cosmic inflation. And he references an article that we have not looked at, but it's dealing with stardust. And the article is Stardust Casts Doubt on Recent Big Bang.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know what this is talking about. You may recall some months ago a team of scientists working in Antarctica on a project called the BICEP project claimed to have detected gravitational waves in the microwave background of the early universe, and that this was thought to be confirmatory of the inflationary model of the universe. And this caused a great hubbub among scientists and in the popular press as well. Well, now apparently these results have been drawn into question. It seems that their results could have been simply due to the contamination of interstellar dust, so that in fact they had not detected these gravitational waves as they had formerly thought. So that result now has been withdrawn.
There is other evidence for the expansion, though. I mean, this was
yeah, right. This is about inflationary models and these gravitational waves, and they thought they had evidence for this, but now that's been called seriously into question because of the possibility that intergalactic dust had contaminated the observations.
Okay. Final question here from Sam. To my understanding, if I'm correct, Dr. Craig is finishing up his research and writing this year on abstract objects. I would love to hear about where he plans to turn his focus next.
I don't know yet. That's a good question. Having drawn this study of divine aseity to a close, I need to embark on a new research project, and I haven't picked one yet, so I don't know.
Okay. We would like to thank the Christian Apologetics Alliance of Facebook. Great group there. We appreciate it. We'll do this again sometime.